Introduction: the ear that started a war. In 1731, a British merchant captain stood on the deck of his ship in the Caribbean. Spanish coast guards boarded him. They accused him of smuggling. Then, as a warning to Britain, one officer sliced off the captain's ear. 8 years later, that ear would be placed on a table in the British Parliament, and Britain would declare war. This is the War of Jenkins Ear, one of history's strangest triggers for global conflict, and one of the clearest examples of how small incidents can ignite massive imperial wars. Part 1. Empires on Edge. By the early 1700s, Britain and Spain were rivals locked in economic competition. Spain controlled vast territories in the Americas. Britain wanted access to their trade. The problem was mercantilism. Spain tightly restricted who could trade with its colonies. British merchants ignored these rules and smuggled goods anyway. The Caribbean became a pressure cooker. Smugglers, privateers, armed patrols, corruption on all sides. Spanish coast guards had legal authority to search British ships. British captains saw this as harassment. Tensions simmered for decades before the ear incident ever happened. Part 2. Robert Jenkins and the Severed Ear. In 1731, British captain Robert Jenkins was sailing near Cuba. His ship was stopped by Spanish coast guards. They accused him of illegal trade. During the search, an officer named Juan de Leon Fandino cut off Jenkins' ear. According to Jenkins, the officer told him to take this to your king and tell him the same will happen if he dares to do the same. Jenkins survived. He kept the ear. And for years, nothing happened. Until British politics needed a spark. Part 3. Propaganda and Parliament. By the late 1730s, British politicians wanted war. Why? Economic frustration, public anger over trade losses, desire to weaken Spain's empire. In 1738, Jenkins was called before Parliament. He allegedly produced his preserved ear. Whether this moment was theatrical or exaggerated hardly mattered. Newspapers exploded with outrage. Spain was portrayed as cruel and tyrannical. Britain as a victim of imperial bullying. Public opinion shifted. In 1739, Britain declared war on Spain. The War of Jenkins Ear had begun. Part 4. War in the Caribbean. This was not a European battlefield war. It was a naval and colonial conflict. Fighting focused on the Caribbean, Central America, Atlantic sea routes. Britain targeted Spanish ports and treasure routes. One of the largest operations was against Cartagena de Indias, in modern Colombia. Britain sent a massive fleet, over 180 ships, around 30,000 men. It was one of the largest amphibious assaults of the 18th century. And it failed. Part 5. The disaster at Cartagena. The British expected an easy victory. They were wrong. Spanish commander Blas de Lezo, despite being missing a leg, missing an eye, missing an arm, successfully defended the city. British forces were devastated by tropical disease, poor coordination, Spanish fortifications. More British soldiers died from sickness than combat. The defeat shattered Britain's confidence. It exposed the limits of naval power when logistics, climate, and planning failed. Part 6. A war absorbed by a bigger conflict. By the early 1740s, Europe descended into a much larger crisis. The War of the Austrian Succession began. The War of Jenkins Ear did not end. It was absorbed. Britain and Spain continued fighting, but now as part of a global European war involving France, Austria, Prussia, multiple colonies. What began with an ear became part of a continent-spanning conflict. Part 7. Why the war mattered. The War of Jenkins Ear mattered for 3 major reasons. First, colonial trade. It exposed how vital overseas commerce had become to European power. Second, naval warfare. Large fleets alone were not enough. Disease, supply, and leadership mattered more. Third, imperial overreach. Britain learned that empire could not be expanded through force alone. These lessons shaped British strategy for decades. Part 8. Why it's forgotten. The war is often overlooked because it merged into a larger conflict, it lacked decisive victories, it was fought mostly at sea and overseas. But its story is unforgettable. A mutilated sailor. A preserved ear. A parliament hungry for war. Few conflicts show the power of propaganda more clearly. Conclusion. When symbols start wars. The War of Jenkins Ear reminds us that wars are rarely caused by a single event. The ear was not the cause. It was the excuse. Behind it lay economic rivalry, imperial ambition, political manipulation. Empires do not fall because of ears. They fall because of what ears are made to represent. And in this case, one severed ear helped plunge the Atlantic world into war.